The air on the set of Jimmy Kimmel's talk show buzzed with anticipation as the audience settled in for another night of celebrity banter. Sylvester Stallone, the iconic action star, was the main guest, a figure whose presence alone commanded attention. His weathered face and gravelly voice carried decades of Hollywood grit, and fans were eager to hear his take on his latest project, a gritty reboot of a classic franchise. Kimmel, ever the charismatic host, thrived on these moments. His quick wit and playful jabs a staple of the show. But tonight something felt different. The energy was sharper, almost brittle, as if the room itself sensed a storm brewing. What could push a seasoned star like Stallone to the edge? Could Kimmel, known for his charm, misstep so badly as to ignite a feud? And why would a routine interview spiral into chaos? As the cameras rolled, Kimmel opened with his usual monologue, poking fun at recent headlines. The world outside the studio was tense, grappling with heated debates over artificial intelligence in filmmaking. Studios were increasingly relying on AI to write scripts, generate visuals, and even mimic actors' voices, sparking outrage among creatives who saw their craft under threat. Kimmel, sensing a chance for humor, tossed out a quip about AI replacing aging action stars, a not-so-subtle nod to Stallone's long career. The audience laughed, but Stallone's smile tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. Was this just a harmless joke, or had Kimmel unknowingly struck a nerve? The host, oblivious to the shift, pressed on, introducing Stallone with a montage of his iconic roles, from Rocky to Rambo, each clip a reminder of his enduring legacy. But the montage ended with a cheeky AI-generated clip of a young Stallone, digitally recreated for a recent ad campaign. The crowd cheered, but Stallone's jaw clenched. Why would Kimmel highlight something so controversial? Stallone took his seat, his massive frame filling the chair as he leaned back, exuding a mix of confidence and wariness. Kimmel, ever the showman, dove into light questions about the new film, but his tone carried an edge, as if testing the waters. He asked Stallone how it felt to compete in an industry obsessed with youth, where AI could churn out a flawless version of his younger self. The question landed like a jab, and Stallone's response was measured but curt, emphasizing the value of human grit over digital perfection. Kimmel, perhaps sensing resistance, doubled down, joking that maybe AI could write a better Rocky sequel than the last one. The audience chuckled, but Stallone's laugh was forced, his fingers drumming on the armrest. What was Kimmel playing at? Was he baiting Stallone for laughs, or was there something deeper at play? The tension simmered as the interview progressed, with Kimmel steering the conversation towards Stallone's vocal stance against AI in Hollywood. The actor had recently spoken at an industry panel, passionately defending the soul of human creativity against what he called soulless tech. Kimmel, however, framed it differently, suggesting Stallone's views were out of touch, a relic of an older era. The host's tone grew patronizing, implying that resisting AI was like fighting progress itself. Stallone's face darkened, his voice dropping to a low growl as he countered that art wasn't a machine's game. The audience sensed the shift, their murmurs growing quieter. Kimmel, undeterred, pushed further, asking if Stallone's resistance was just fear of being replaced. The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Had Kimmel gone too far? Would Stallone let it slide? Or was this the spark that would ignite the fire? The atmosphere on the set thickened as Stallone's restraint began to fray. Kimmel's pointed question about fear of replacement lingered unanswered as the host leaned forward, his smirk betraying a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Stallone, however, wasn't one to shrink from a challenge. His eyes locked onto Kimmel's, a silent warning that the conversation was veering into dangerous territory. The audience, sensing the rising stakes, grew hushed, their anticipation palpable. Kimmel, perhaps misreading the mood, pressed on, pivoting to a recent industry scandal where a major studio had used AI to recreate a deceased actor's likeness without family consent. He framed it as a bold step forward, a way to preserve legacies, and asked Stallone if he'd consider letting AI immortalize his own image after he was gone. The question wasn't just provocative, it was personal, cutting into Stallone's deeply held beliefs about art and authenticity. Stallone's response was slow, deliberate. his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd fought for every inch of his career. He spoke of the human cost of AI, how it stripped away the soul of performance, reducing actors to data points. He recounted a recent encounter with a young actor, terrified that their career could be erased by a machine. The story wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a plea for the industry to remember its humanity. Kimmel, however, saw an opening for humor. He cut in, suggesting that Stallone's passion sounded like a man clinging to the past, afraid of being left behind. The audience tittered nervously, but the jab landed poorly. Stallone's posture stiffened, his hands balling into fists. The host, undeterred, leaned into the moment, tossing out a quip about how Stallone's films were already predictable enough for AI to write. It was a cheap shot, and the room felt it. The mood shifted decisively as Stallone's patience snapped. He leaned forward, his voice low but laced with fury, and called Kimmel out for trivializing a fight that mattered to countless artists. The fool. Accusation wasn't just about the interview. It was about Kimmel's role as a gatekeeper, someone who could amplify voices but chose mockery instead. The audience gasped, some clapping in support as Stallone's words cut through the polished veneer of the show. Kimmel, caught off guard, tried to deflect with a laugh, but it came out hollow. He attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground, asking about Stallone's training regimen for his new role, but the actor wasn't having it. He doubled down, pointing out how Kimmel's flippant attitude was part of the problem, a symptom of an industry that valued clicks over craft. The confrontation reached a boiling point when Kimmel, visibly rattled, made a critical misstep in an attempt to regain control. He suggested that Stallone's resistance to AI was hypocritical, given his own use of digital effects in past films. The accusation was not only inaccurate, but deeply insulting, implying Stallone was a fraud who'd benefited from the very technology he criticized. The audience fell silent, the air heavy with shock. Stallone's face reddened, his eyes blazing with a mix of hurt and rage. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a personal attack, one that threatened to unravel the respect he'd earned over decades. The stage was set for an explosive retaliation, one that would shift the power dynamic and leave the host scrambling to salvage his show. The silence on the set was deafening, the weight of Kimmel's accusation hanging like a guillotine. Stallone's eyes burned with a fury that seemed to draw from every battle he'd fought, both on screen and off. The audience, frozen, waited. For his response, their collective breath held as the tension coiled tighter. Kimmel, sensing the misstep, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual composure cracking under the intensity of Stallone's glare. The host's attempt to paint Stallone as a hypocrite had backfired, igniting a fire that threatened to consume the carefully curated atmosphere of the show. This was no longer a playful sparring match. It was a reckoning, and Stallone was ready to strike. With a voice that cut through the room like a blade, Stallone unleashed a verbal barrage that left no room for retreat. He dismantled Kimmel's accusation with surgical precision, clarifying that practical effects and minimal CGI in his films were worlds apart from AI's soulless mimicry. His words were laced with raw emotion, recounting the blood and sweat of his early days, when he wrote and fought for Rocky against all odds. He painted a vivid picture of an industry that once valued human struggle, now seduced by shortcuts that erased the very heart of storytelling. The audience leaned forward, captivated, some nodding in agreement as Stallone's passion resonated with their own unease about a tech-driven world. Kimmel, now visibly shaken, tried to interject with a light-hearted quip, but Stallone shut it down with a single searing look. The actor turned the tables, questioning Kimmel's own role in the industry's shift. He accused the host of pandering to corporate interests, using his platform to mock those who dared to resist the tide. The crowd erupted in a mix of gasps and cheers, the energy tilting decisively in Stallone's favor. Then came the moment that would echo beyond the studio walls. Stallone, his voice dripping with disdain, called Kimmel a court jester for the machine, a line so biting it drew audible reactions from the audience. The insult wasn't just rude. It was a devastating blow to Kimmel's carefully crafted image as a relatable everyman. The host's face flushed, his smile replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. He scrambled to regain control, suggesting they move to a commercial break. But Stallone wasn't finished. He stood, his towering presence dominating the stage, and declared that he wouldn't sit through another minute of mockery. The audience roared, some standing in solidarity, as Stallone's defiance electrified the room. Kimmel, now desperate, made a final attempt to salvage the moment, offering a half-hearted apology that sounded more like a plea. But Stallone, unyielding, turned his back and walked toward the wings, leaving Kimmel alone under the harsh studio lights. The host's call for a break was drowned out by the crowd's reaction, a chaotic blend of shock and admiration for the actor's stand. As Stallone's figure disappeared into the shadows of the stage wings, the studio erupted into a cacophony of cheers, jeers, and stunned murmurs. Kimmel sat alone, the spotlight unforgiving, his usual polish replaced by a mix of embarrassment and defiance. The audience's reaction wasn't just about the moment, it was a reflection of their own frustrations with a world increasingly dictated by impersonal systems. Stallone's exit had transformed him into a symbol of resistance. While Kimmel, for the first time in years, looked small, a man caught off guard by the weight of his own miscalculation. The crew scrambled to cue the commercial break, but the damage was done. The show, built on light-hearted banter, had become a battleground, and Kimmel was losing. When the cameras stopped rolling, the tension didn't dissipate. Backstage, producers huddled, their voices urgent as they debated how to salvage the episode. Kimmel, still seated, stared at the empty guest chair, his mind racing. He'd underestimated Stallone, assuming the actor's tough guy persona wouldn't translate to a verbal showdown. Now, with the audience still buzzing and social media no doubt already ablaze, Kimmel faced a choice: double down or try to repair the rift. His pride, however, leaned toward the former. He signaled to a producer, his voice low but firm, insisting they cut Stallone's segment entirely and move to the next guest. It was a bold move, one that reeked of pettiness, and the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Word of Kimmel's decision reached Stallone, who was still backstage, cooling off in a green room. The news reignited Stallone's fury. He'd walked off to make a point, but Kimmel's attempt to erase him felt like a final insult, a power play meant to bury his stand. Stallone, fueled by a mix of righteous anger and decades of resilience, made a decision that would shift the narrative. He stormed back toward the stage, ignoring the protests of a flustered assistant. The audience, still in their seats during the break, caught sight of him and erupted, their cheers a deafening wave of support. Kimmel, alerted by a stagehand, froze as Stallone reappeared, his presence commanding the room without a single word. The actor didn't need a microphone. His defiance spoke louder than any scripted line. Stallone took center stage, his voice steady but charged with conviction. He addressed the audience directly, bypassing Kimmel entirely, and spoke of the fight for creativity in an industry at a crossroads. He shared stories of young artists he'd mentored, their dreams threatened by a system that prioritized profit over passion. His words were raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal, drawing applause that grew louder with every sentence. Kimmel, sidelined, could only watch as Stallone turned the show into his platform, rallying the crowd to value human artistry over cold technology. The host's earlier quips now seemed trivial, his authority diminished by Stallone's unyielding resolve. The audience wasn't just entertained, they were inspired, their emotions tethered to a cause bigger than the night's drama. Stallone's impromptu speech reverberated through the studio, each word a rallying cry that transformed the audience from spectators into participants in a larger fight. His towering figure, lit by the stage lights, seemed to embody the resilience he'd preached, and the crowd's applause swelled into a standing ovation. Kimmel, relegated to the sidelines, gripped the armrests of his chair, his face a mask of forced neutrality. The host's earlier decision to cut Stallone's segment now felt like a distant miscalculation, one that had handed the actor a platform to seize control. The energy in the room belonged to Stallone, and Kimmel's show for this moment was no longer his own. The crew, sensing the shift, hesitated to interrupt, their usual urgency replaced by a rare deference to the unfolding drama. As Stallone's speech reached its crescendo, he turned his gaze toward Kimmel, his eyes sharp but not vindictive. Instead of another attack, he extended an unexpected challenge. He urged Kimmel to use his influence to amplify the voices of artists fighting against the encroachment of technology, to be a leader rather than a bystander. It was a moment of grace amid the confrontation, a chance for redemption that hung in the air. The audience held its breath, waiting for Kimmel's response. The host, caught between pride and the weight of the moment, rose from his chair, his movements stiff. He nodded, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge Stallone's point. But his silence spoke louder than words. The crowd murmured, unsure whether this was capitulation or defiance. The cameras, now rolling again, captured the uneasy truce. Stallone, his point made, stepped back, allowing Kimmel to reclaim the stage. The host, visibly rattled, attempted to pivot, introducing the next segment with a strained smile. But the audience's energy remained with Stallone, their applause lingering as he took his seat, not as a guest but as a victor. Kimmel's jokes fell flat, his usual rhythm disrupted by the shadow of Stallone's stand. Backstage, producers scrambled to adjust the show's flow, aware that the night's events would dominate headlines and social media. Stallone's words had struck a chord, not just with the live audience, but with viewers at home, who were already sharing clips of his speech, turning it into a viral manifesto. As the show continued, Stallone's presence loomed large, even in his silence. He listened to the next guest, a young musician with a quiet intensity, nodding as they spoke of their own struggles in an industry obsessed with trends. The moment wasn't lost on the audience, who saw in Stallone a mentor, a fighter who'd put everything on the line. Kimmel, meanwhile, struggled to regain his footing, his charisma dimmed by the weight of his earlier missteps. The contrast was stark. Stallone, the underdog who'd risen through sheer will, and Kimmel, the polished host, now grappling with the cost of his own hubris. The stage was set for a resolution that would define the night, one that would leave no doubt about the power of standing firm. The show limped forward, but the undercurrent of Stallone's triumph pulsed through every moment. Kimmel, his confidence shaken, leaned heavily on his scripted notes, his banter with the young musician guest feeling rehearsed and hollow. The audience, still riding the high of Stallone's stand, responded tepidly, their attention drifting to the action star, who sat with a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any quip. His earlier challenge to Kimmel hung unresolved, a lingering question of whether the host would rise to the occasion or let pride dictate his path. The tension wasn't just personal now, it was a microcosm of a broader cultural clash, one that pitted human passion against the allure of technological ease. Every glance between Stallone and Kimmel carried weight, a silent negotiation of power and respect. As the final segment approached, Kimmel faced a pivotal moment. The producers, sensing the need to address the elephant in the room, urged him to acknowledge the earlier confrontation. Backstage, whispers circulated about Stallone's impact, with crew members quietly admiring his boldness. Kimmel, aware of the cameras and the audience's expectant eyes, took a deep breath and pivoted from his planned closing. He turned to Stallone, his voice softer, stripped of its earlier edge. He admitted that the conversation had gotten heated, and that he'd been too quick to dismiss Stallone's concerns. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a concession, a rare crack in Kimmel's polished facade. The audience leaned in, sensing a shift, their earlier frustration with the host, tempered by curiosity. Stallone, his expression unreadable, nodded slightly, acknowledging Kimmel's words without fully endorsing them. He seized the moment to steer the conversation back to the heart of his message, speaking directly to the audience about the power of standing up for what matters. His voice, steady and resonant, carried a warmth that contrasted with his earlier fury, inviting the crowd to see themselves in his fight. He shared a brief story of a mentor who'd once told him that true strength wasn't in winning every battle, but in refusing to stay down. The anecdote landed with profound impact, drawing murmurs of agreement and a renewed wave of applause. Kimmel, for the first time, seemed to listen, his usual impulse to interject held in check. The segment closed with an unexpected gesture. Stallone, rising from his chair, extended a hand to Kimmel, a move that wasn't scripted but felt like a bridge. Kimmel, after a moment's hesitation, shook it, the handshake captured by the cameras as a symbol of mutual respect, however tentative. The audience erupted, their cheers a release of the night's pent-up emotions. Stallone's stand had reshaped the show, not through destruction but through conviction, forcing Kimmel to confront his own role in the industry's narrative. The stage, once a battleground, now felt like a shared space, where two men, flawed but human, had navigated a collision of ideals. The handshake between Stallone and Kimmel lingered in the air, a quiet resolution that carried more weight than the night's earlier fireworks. The audience's cheers swelled, a cathartic release that celebrated not just Stallone's victory, but the possibility of reconciliation. The stage, once fractured by conflict, now held a fragile unity, a testament to the power of conviction tempered by humanity. Kimmel, his composure partially restored, managed a genuine smile, though his eyes betrayed a lingering unease. Stallone, his mission accomplished, sat back down, his presence still commanding but no longer confrontational. The show was nearing its end, but the impact of the night would ripple far beyond the studio. Kimmel, seizing the moment to reclaim some agency, closed the show with a nod to Stallone's passion, framing the night as a reminder of why art matters. His words, though carefully chosen, carried a sincerity that hadn't been present earlier. He invited Stallone to share one final thought, a rare deference that acknowledged the actor's dominance. Stallone, his voice now calm but resonant, spoke of hope, not just for Hollywood but for anyone fighting to preserve what makes them human in a world chasing efficiency. He urged the audience to support creators who pour their souls into their work, to choose heart over algorithm. The crowd roared, their applause a resounding endorsement of his message, and Kimmel joined in, clapping with a mix of respect and relief. As the credits rolled, the audience rose to their feet, their ovation a tribute to a night that had transcended entertainment. Stallone's stand had turned a routine talk show into a platform for something profound, a call to action that resonated, with viewers grappling with their own fears about a tech-driven future. Backstage, the crew buzzed with a mix of exhaustion and awe, already anticipating the headlines and viral clips that would dominate the internet. Kimmel, retreating to his dressing room, reflected on the humbling lesson of underestimating a man like Stallone. The actor, meanwhile, left the studio with his head high, surrounded by fans and crew members who saw in him a rare courage. The night's events became a cultural touchstone, sparking conversations about the soul of creativity and the role of influential figures like Kimmel in shaping narratives. Stallone's words inspired a wave of support for artists, from grassroots campaigns to industry panels demanding ethical boundaries for AI. The actor himself returned to his work, his legacy bolstered by a moment that reminded the world why he'd endured. Kimmel, chastened but resilient, adapted, weaving more nuance into his future interviews, a subtle nod to the night he'd been outmatched. The story of their clash, far from fading, became a legend, a triumphant reminder that even in a world of machines, the human spirit could still steal the show. Jimmy Kimmel versus Sylvester Stallone, Part 7.